And this is like the one of 3 that I'm doing today, so this always makes me nervous. So I've known Abigail since Abigail was 3 years old. I've seen her, I've seen some elaborate fort building, I've seen Abigail dig holes. I was looking through my pictures the other day, and there was one of Abigail walking on one of the creeks here in the woods, and it was completely frozen over, which isn't a common event. Like the creek, it was one of the campus creeks, and it was solid ice. And I just picture of Abigail walking on it, and it has this very otherworldly quality. That might give you, obviously a sense of how long I've known Abigail, but, she's always had something otherworldly about her, and her writing. And one of my favorite things about it, I'm just going to skip a couple paragraphs here because I know you just want to go to lunch. But Abigail has the wild, genuine cackle of a laugh. I don't know if you've heard Abigail laugh. And I've heard it many times over the years, and I suppose anyone can fake a witch laugh, but to actually have one is extraordinary. And what it does is it takes fiction and brings it into the world so that the world seems all the more enchanting. It's just the fictional idea of this sort of witch laugh becomes part of our world. And it's wonderful. And that's what Abigail does as a writer. Abigail observes things as if they were a character in a book. And when Abigail reads, you can feel the trembling of the very page where you rest. And it's no small sorcery. Amen.
So, my name is Abigail, if you didn't already know that. I'm going to be presenting my advanced study presentation, which is so lovingly titled Quinton System Inctus, which is the same name as my book. Might not be the official title, might change that later. But yeah, so here's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to go through an overview of the presentation. I'm going to talk about my timeline, so kind of how things happen chronologically. I'm going to talk about how I found the idea for this project. I'm going to talk about how I wrote it, and then I'm going to talk about how I edited it. So first of all, for the overview, what did I do? Well, I wrote a story. The finished project is a Google Doc that is 148 pages long and 54,531 words. You can see paper copies of it there, around. So that is what I did. What did I write about? What did I fill this entire Google Doc with? Well, first of all, I found a new galaxy. So my story takes place in a different planetary system, the Quinton system. This is a drawing that I did of the planets here. Every single one of these planets is visited at some point in my story. These are the twins. This is Bethel and Sitar. This is beach, circles of beach, because I would want to live there, so circles of beach. This is mountains and moss deserts. This one is N1. It's an ice planet. There are sea snakes there. This is the sun. This one is Icarus. It is the closest planet to the sun, and it actually functions as a lighthouse planet. It shines so bright that you can use it to find your way to this galaxy, this solar system, even from very, very far away. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. This is Ur-2. It is the closest planet to our Earth, which is why they originally named it Earth-2, and then later the name slurred into Earth-2. Yes? What is wrong with it? Very good question. It's sci-fi. So, it's science fiction, and very, very fictional, obviously. I don't have any telescopes, so I couldn't see this. Ur-2 has one moon, Luna. On this moon, there's a secret society of sage guardians that take care of all the knowledge of this world. They keep that there. This is Augur. This is farmland, and these are rivers. So this takes care of most of the plant needs, food, and such. These are its 3 moons. These are kind of technological tropoli. Take care of most of the mechanical things. These are where most of the ships are made, the spaceships that travel throughout this galaxy. These 3 moons are Het, Tasir, and then I forgot the other one's name. Sorry. They only travel on one of these moons, so they don't have that much time. This down here is a button galaxy that I made. So these are buttons. So N1, Twins, Augur, the Sun, Icarus. Earth 2 didn't make it on this one. But yeah, so I did that because I was bored. Okay, maybe silence your cell phones if you haven't already. Alright, so I also found another dimension. It is called the Fold. It is everywhere and everything at the same time. It shows up, it looks like rainbow, so it is every single color imaginable all together. You can use it for a lot of different things that I'll get to in a moment. But these are just some pictures that I thought reminded me of it. This was some YouTube thumbnail that I thought looked cool. This is Tom Holland from a movie where his thoughts show up around his head, but I thought that the thoughts kind of look like the fold because lots of different colors and stuff, so that's good. Fashion show, the dresses, I thought it kind of looked like the fold. This album cover, I like the way that there's like a galaxy in the background. It's kind of a rip, because the way you enter the fold is you can create rips into it, and when you do that, you do a lot of different things. So obviously the Voyager, people can use the fold to travel. So you can enter the fold in one place, exit in another place. You can also use the fold to create illusions. So for instance, you can make partial rips into the fold and augment reality, make things look like, create things that you can see but aren't really there, erase things. So that is fun. So only a certain amount of people can control the fold. So I think the statistic comes around to maybe like 3 out of 100 people can use the fold. But for the people who can, they have different levels of ability within that. So only some people can travel, only some people can be illusionists. The other type is a seer, and those are people who can look into the fold and see what's happened in the past and also catch glimpses of what is happening in the future, what will happen. I have several different characters of these kinds in my stories. The way you can tell them folders from everybody else is their eyes change different colors. They look like the fold. The eyes circle through all the colors of the rainbow. Any questions so far? Queries? Alright. So here's a quick summary of my story. These are some little illustrations that I did because I was bored. But it starts with an illusionist from Earth in around the 1800s. This is him right here and also right there. His name is Mr. Davier, and he uses his control over the fold to create a magic show. And that's what he does for a living. But then he begins to learn that there are other worlds out there, and he travels to them. And he records everything in this blue notebook. All the, like, this kind of colors and stuff, like there, and then down here is the fold. That's how I started to draw it at the time. So Mr. Davier creates this notebook that holds all of his knowledge about the fold, but he accidentally loses it within the fold. And it is found by this person right here, Elise, many years later. And something happens to the Earth. I think it was a sickness that ravaged the Earth because we're all very familiar with that. And so basically people had to leave. Everybody had to leave. And so they decided to leave and go to the new galaxy, the one that I previously mentioned, and they used the fold to do that. Also with spaceships, like this one up here with the help of Max, Spaceship Commander Max. And so they journey to the new galaxy, set up shop, and that is where my story takes place. The fold is in danger, and my characters have to save it by traveling around and enlisting in the help of some space pirates and mercenaries. Alright, any questions? Alright, so the timeline. How did this happen? So on May 18th, I filed my application to do this advanced study. Part of the application is you have to write a page about what you want to do. At the time that I wrote that application, I didn't know what I wanted to write about. So I wrote a page about something that I wrote a page about not knowing what I wanted to write about. So, as you can gather, it was largely a page of just filler words and just me trying to come up with anything that I could possibly to be like, hey, I'm serious about writing something, I just don't know what. And then, a couple months later, on July 30th, I had my first idea. And then, between July 30th and March 15th, which was the majority of the school year, I was writing the first draft. And then, on March 15th, I finished writing it. And between March 15th and 23rd, which is a very quick turnaround, I did closed-door editing. So I went back through, I read it, and I edited it myself. And then on March 23rd, I had the second draft. And now I'm in the midst of the third draft. I haven't finished it yet. It's still an ongoing project, but I will talk about what my plan is for the future. Ms. Scott?
What is closed-door editing?
Closed-door editing. Thank you. So closed-door editing means it's just me editing. It's just me going back and making sure that I said what I wanted to say and that I've got all of my ideas out there and that, kind of just finalizing that I kind of said what I wanted to say, everything that I could do just by myself. Ms. Galko.
When you had your first idea, were you like somewhere and you had this epiphany, or did you have a lot of ideas and then whittled it down? Or?
That is a great question. And that is exactly what I'm about to talk about next. So, perfect segue into the next topic. But first, Neil Gaiman, because, yes, I'm cutting the back, but I love Neil Gaiman. He is awesome. If you don't know, he writes Sandman comic books, which are awesome. 10 out of 10, would recommend. Also wrote the book that was turned into the movie Coraline, which I guess is actually very polarizing. People actually either love it or are terrified. I love it. But I was watching an interview of his, and he said that it is not that writers have any more or less ideas than anyone else. It is just that they train themselves to notice them. And I like this quote because I think it's true. I think that everybody has ideas. It is just whether or not you really do anything with them. He gave the example that it is that moment when you're sitting down and you think, what if your chair was bitten by a werewolf? If the moon came out, would it grow hair, would it grow claws, would it start to growl and eat you? So if you have that idea, what do you do with it? Do you just forget about it, or do you notice it, maybe write it down, or turn it into a movie or a script or anything? So I really like that idea of ideas, and it is applicable to what happened to me, my advanced study here. But first, what I'm stuck with, where my ideas come from, it's a faucet in the back of my head. And it's manned by a hamster, because everything in my head is manned by hamsters. The hamster's name is Sylvester. He runs the faucet. If it's on, it's a good day. The writing comes easily. I can just put one word down to the next, and it just goes. Or I get ideas and act such. Unfortunately, I can't really control him, but food helps sometimes. This is a WikiHow picture, how to train your hamster. Food. Peanut butter crackers work best for my Sylvester. But for this specific idea, how I recognized it was I was walking back home from rollerblading. I was skating and I was walking home. I was on the field hockey field, and this sentence popped into my head: "The orb flirted death on 2 accounts." That sentence. And then I immediately went home and I wrote it down on this lovely piece of paper, and then the rest kind of followed. And so at that point, I was like, hey, I have to do this advanced study, and now I have just found an idea for a planet. This orb is just a fancy word for planet. Later I changed that so it actually, I think, just says planet, so it's less confusing. So that's my first planet. Then once I found that, I was like, oh, maybe I should find more planets. And I did. I had the second sentence that popped into my head. The planet was not even that. Wrote that down. Got another planet. And at that point, I was like, okay, I've got to start to kind of something here. And so when I started having more ideas, I recognized them if they could be added to this idea. And they were, which worked out great for me. And then this is the fold. At the same time, I started to begin to have an idea of another dimension that people could enter or maybe contort and control a little bit. So that's the first page of the fold. So it took a lot to kind of sift through these ideas and find which ones worked and which ones didn't. I did a lot of scientific research. I read some fun books about science that I got from Dr. P. Dr. P. Best. So I learned a little bit about time and different dimensions and how that works. It's fascinating stuff. I didn't get to use much of it. I only used as much science as would work. If it didn't work, I just ignored it. So most of the stuff didn't really make it into my advanced study. This was a lot of ideas about what might happen. There are aliens in here, and no aliens made it into my advanced study. That didn't work. But I thought about it at some point. But writing most of this stuff down, I had to figure out where I wanted to go and where I didn't want to go. So that was also very early on, sifting through ideas and stuff. I tried to do math, and it's right here. I tried to do an equation that would, Mr. Watt's coming back. I tried to make an equation that would calculate the average temperature on one of my planets, Icarus, the guard planet, the one that's really, really hot and bright. But I gave up because it was really difficult and I couldn't figure out what the Greek letters meant. Because it's really difficult to like Google Greek letters in math and get a good answer. So I gave up on that. So that actually didn't make it into my advanced study either. So characters, coming up with characters. I think that characters are born and not made, but they can be cultivated. So first off, there's a character that I tried to make and didn't work, which is this lovely lady over here, Taz. I tried to make Taz because I was like, oh, I'm writing an advanced study, I need a character, and so I made Taz. But then as I started writing about her, it really didn't work, and she was really, really plain, really, really boring, and so I had to just scrap her because I was like, I'm really sorry, but I can't write an entire story about you. And then I went on to think about Timber, who is the character that lives on the lighthouse planet, Icarus, the one that can attract other ships to this solar system. He was cultivated because I was like, okay, so I have this lighthouse planet, and somebody needs to guard it because someone needs to make sure that it keeps going so that people can still find their way to this place. So I knew somebody had to be there, and that person would probably, like being alone because they're the only person there. And so from then on, I kind of teased out more details about him and started writing, and things kind of started happening a lot more smooth than with Taz. And so I was like, okay, this is great. I'm going to roll with it. I like this guy. And then my last character that I'm going to talk about, Carla. Carla's my favorite because Carla was completely boring. I was just in the middle of writing. It was like, I think, like December, so I had been like writing for a while. The faucet was turned on, things were coming, it was going really, really well, and I was like, okay, I have 2 space pirates, and I know who they are, I know their characters. They're going to land on this planet, but I don't think they would go there alone. I think they would have a third person with them, a third space pirate. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make this third space pirate, and I'm going to name her Carla. And then, at that point, I was just writing Carla. And what was interesting was that as I was writing this character, I started writing backstory that I didn't even know. So at one point I was like, yes, Carla was wearing this hat and they carried this very cool curved dagger with them, just like they always carried the scar that it gave her. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of cool. What happened there? I really don't know. Which sounds crazy, because I have no idea where it came from. I didn't think of it. I just put one word down and then the next, and then the next, and then it happened. And I rolled with it. And it was great. And Carla's like my favorite character. She's like the coolest person ever. I love Carla. She was completely bored and is awesome. So another thing, creative essay. So in Miss Tuck's class, we had to write a creative essay. We could either write it about ourselves or about a fictional character. And I was like, hey, so I have this great character that seems to be, somewhere, I just don't really know where. Why don't I write about her and see if it happens? And so I did. I wrote about Carla, and I really just started with like the first situation, and then I just put one word after the next, and it just went. And so then this was actually where I found out how Carla got the scar, where the knife came from, figured out a couple other details about her. That was really, really awesome. And just really cool to see, because I don't know where it came from, but it happened, and it was great. So playlists for characters. A great thing to do when you're procrastinating, especially, is make playlists for characters, because it does let you get to know them, because music is a great way to get to know somebody, because, there's a lot of different music, people listen to, what they like. And so, I make playlists for characters so I can get to know them better. So like, that one down there is for Carla, this one's for another one of my characters, Ren. This one's for the entire thing as a whole. And this was really great because not only did I get to know my characters better because I was choosing music for them, but now I had something to listen to while I was writing their chapters, which was great. It's also a great way when you're like, oh, I can't write because I need a playlist to listen to, and then you just like make a playlist to listen to and you don't have to write, which is great. Shout out, Niblet made me this playlist for the Space Pirates, which I still listen to. It is awesome. So, thank you, Niblet. Alright, inclusivity. So, when I set out to write this, I was like, I want to include people here that don't usually get included in books. And so I did. I wanted to include a lot of LGBTQIA+ people in this book because they don't usually get included in many spaces. And so I did that. Unfortunately, because it's very short and very quick and very action-packed, there wasn't a whole lot of time to really get into many of their identities because it would have seemed forced and awkward. But one thing that I did want to do specifically was gender and gender identities because pronouns are a very big part of writing. You have to include pronouns when you're writing about somebody. So, one of the main ways that I did that, I have a couple of people who use they/them pronouns in my advanced study. But the main one that I want to talk about is Ren. Ren is one of my characters who uses Zer pronouns, which is kind of one of the lesser known sets of pronouns, but is actually one of the better known sets of pronouns besides just he, she, it, them. So I actually started with she, them for Ren, but then because I'm just a horrible writer, it got very confusing very fast, talking about who I was talking about. Because I wasn't good enough to be able to make distinctions. And also Zer just fit Zer better. It made more sense with who they were. And actually using different pronouns was really, really helpful. Because you always knew when I was talking about Ren, because I was using Zer pronouns. So it really never got confusing. It actually only got confusing because I had two characters that used he, him pronouns, and that got confusing. But Ren never got confusing. Yes, and then just for context, Ren is an X-Ranger from Earth 2 or Earth 2. And that's a picture of a bird, Ren, is Ren.
Could you explain what neopronouns are?
What?
Could you explain what neopronouns are?
I would love to, but I don't know what they are. I just use these because I found them on a Discord that talked about different pronouns and stuff, and I was like, oh, that's really cool, I want to do that. Ms. Tucker?
So Abigail, one of the things I know about you is that you're extremely well read. How many books would you say you read a year?
Oh, that is a very good question. It's a lot. I don't know how many. I don't count.
How often do those books deal with these pronouns?
I have never read a book that uses Zer pronouns. I've only read 2 books that had characters that even use they/them pronouns, and those were both books that I specifically searched out because they had those pronouns in them. So, yes, if you want to read those books, I can just let me know. I'll give recommendations. So yeah, I wanted to do that. It was actually really great. I enjoyed it. Again, it was helpful. Trying to, do what I can for the world in my little way. So, writing. The physical act of just writing all of this out. Okay, so plot. I'm going to try to keep this short, but plot kills stories so fast. I'm not saying that narrative kills stories, but plot kills stories. And I'm going to quote Captain Cold here. He has this awesome quote from The Flash. Make a plan, execute the plan, expect the plan to go off the rails, throw away the plan. And I think that this works perfectly, because if I sit down and I try to plan out every single thing that's going to happen in my story, and I just spend months and months planning without even writing, when I sit down to write, something's going to happen that I didn't plan for. Like Carla and her scar and dagger. I didn't plan that, I could never plan that, but when I sat down and wrote it, it just happened. And eventually, for me, every single time that something spontaneous happens, it's going to be so much better, cooler, and more fun to write about than what I planned out. So, I always just like to go with that. And so plot is never going to be as good as just like the spontaneity of creation, just like whatever happens. But then also, I had characters that the weirdest part in my story, the ickiest part, is the part that has the most plot. Because my two characters had to meet up and leave for N1. Like two new characters met each other for the first time and had to steal the spaceship and get off the planet. If that didn't happen, the story would not progress. Literally things like the story would fall apart, it would not be what I thought about it at all. Which wouldn't be a bad thing, but I kind of wanted to write this story. And so when I got to that point, I was like, oh my god, my characters would never do this. This is just totally not this is weird. I'm trying to make them do something that they would never do. And it's by far the ickiest part of my story, and I had to rewrite it a lot. And that's because it's the part of my story that had the most plot in it. And so after that, I kind of just let it go. I was like, okay, things are just going to happen as they're going to happen, and I'm just going to let it go. And the rest of the story happened that way. It was so much more fun to write it because it didn't feel like I was writing an essay. I was just writing what I was writing. Next.
What's the difference between plot and narrative?
Excellent question. So, you could say that, they're very similar things, but for me, and I read a book by Stephen King called On Writing, and he talked about this, plot is kind of the big events that you plan out to happen in a linear form, that, oh, this is going to happen, this, and this, and this. Whereas narrative is just what happens in the story. So if you think about plot points, big events that happen in the story that are kind of pre-planned out, and if you write an essay, you plan out the big points that you're going to make, here's my thesis statement, here's argument number 1, and then here are 3 reasons why argument number 1. That's kind of more plot, whereas narrative is just what is happening in the story. So it's kind of a nitpicky thing. Weird difference, but yeah. And Stephen King's On Writing is a great book, and he talked about that a lot, and he explained it very, very well. So back to writing as a flow. There's my faucet over there. It really does just kind of happen. You just put one word in front of the next, in front of the next, in front of the next, and stuff just happens. I legitimately have no idea where it comes from. I couldn't be oh yeah, I had a friend when I was in 2nd grade, and that person is Carla. I could never know that, because I don't know where I found all this crazy stuff, but it just happened. I think it's magic. It is so much fun to just sit down and write, and just be I don't know where this is coming from, but it's coming from somewhere, and it's happening, and it's just awesome and so cool. And I think that everybody should try it, because it only takes a pen and a pencil and a piece of paper to get started, and it's so much fun. It's a great way to not be bored because, you know, if you have an extra second, you can just write. It's lovely. So where do I like to write? I have a scriptorium, as Mr. Pinnacle calls it. My scriptorium is underneath my bed because I have a loft bed. So at any given time, I'm probably just writing underneath my bed. I have a lovely chair that I got for my birthday. It's my favorite chair. It's my reading chair and my writing chair. I have a bookshelf so that, like, if I get writer's block, I can just read books. I have some coffee so that I can drink something while I write, stay caffeinated. And I like to write at night. So I write when it's dark during the night hours. So, writing, the motivation to write. So I like to keep the first draft of everything just like to myself as I write. Because the biggest thing that moves me forward personally is the hope of success and the fear of failure. It is the hope that this is going to be great. The hope that this will be awesome, that people will like it, that I'll like it, that it'll be a lot of fun. Like, that's what keeps me going. But then also what keeps me going is the fear of it being bad. And that might seem like, oh, if you think it's going to be bad, why would you just stop? Well, for me, it's always like, oh, I think this is going to be bad, so I'm going to keep doing it and try to make it better so that it's not bad. That makes sense. So that is honestly my biggest motivation as I write. And I like to keep it to myself because if I share it with people, if I share it and they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, then they're like, oh my gosh, you're right, it is amazing, I can just stop writing right now. And then it never gets done. Or if they're like, oh my gosh, this is awful, then I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awful, I'm just going to stop. So usually it's just better for me to keep it to myself so that I can just kind of write the story for me first, say what I want to say, and then figure out everything else about it later, whether or not other people like it or whether it's actually good or not. Because it is just fun to write, just for one's own sake. So to drink. Quick slide, but I like to drink when I write something, anything. Especially during closed door writing, because it's just helpful to have something to just kind of keep you going so that you don't get too, like, you can kind of measure time by drinks, you know, how long it takes you to drink something. So I like coffee, or maybe tea, or just bubbly or ice water, just something so that, you know, you're not spiraling late into the night. So I actually made a mistake when I was first writing. I did edits way too soon. So these are both pages from the very beginning, because my golden Sharpie still worked. But basically, I wrote all this down, and then I printed it out, and then I immediately edited it, like, right after that. And that was really bad, because if you've done anything creative, then you'll know that, like, right after you draw something, or right after you shoot a movie, or right after you write something, it seems awesome. It is the best thing in the world, and nothing is ever going to be better than it. However, if you take a step back, and you wait a couple of weeks, or a couple of months, or even a year, you can look back at something and be like, oh my gosh, that arm is so much longer than it's supposed to be. Or like, why on earth did I shoot it like that? Or why did I cut it like that? And the same thing is with writing, because it still seems like something you wrote. Whereas if you just wait a bit, it feels more and more like somebody else's writing, and it's way easier to edit somebody else's writing than your own. At least that's what I've found. It's way easier to cut and burn and maul something that's not my own child. But like, also think about like an embarrassing story, right? So like the day after you do, or right after you do something embarrassing, you're like, oh my god, I just want to melt to a puddle on the floor because like I cannot believe I just said that or just did that. But if you wait a little while, and you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, that was so funny, I totally just like fell over and just like ate it in front of everybody. You know, like it seems a lot more funny a couple days later. So, the fact of reading on writing. This is something that I found out recently because it kind of changed the outlook of my advanced study. So Stephen King says write a lot, read a lot, and I love that because one just helps the other. And just surrounding yourself with words is a great way to just be better at reading, better at writing. So while you're reading while you're writing, I tend to unintentionally imitate things. The first time this happened was like after I read a book called Redwall, which is about a whole bunch of like tiny woodland creatures that live in a monastery. I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. I now want to write a story about tiny woodland things that fight and get into wars. Thankfully, I never did write that because that was a long time ago and it would probably be very bad. But I wanted to write it. And so for this, as I was writing my advanced study, I was reading The Dark Tower by Stephen King, which is like his big epic, think like The Hobbit, or like The Lord of the Rings, how it's just like books and books and books about people just like walking to places. That's kind of what The Dark Tower is. It's just like these three people walking to places. And it's awesome, like I love it. This is like my new favorite thing in the world. But because I was reading somebody's really long epic, that sort of pacing found its way into my advanced study. So especially towards the end, I found myself just like taking all the time in the world for my characters to just travel places. And I was like, you don't need all this words about just traveling. Like you can just cut it down and, you know, like make it a little more succinct. And the main way that this factored in was with the other ending. So I have two endings. There's one in that book, and then there's one that just lives in a Google Doc. And basically, there's one ending where it ties everything up nice and neatly into a bow. And then there's another ending where the story doesn't end, and it keeps going. And that was kind of brought on by The Dark Tower and its never-ending qualities. So that's kind of the main way that influenced what I wrote. But now that I know this, the next time that I want to write, like, if I want to write like a historical piece, I'll read historical books. You know, if I want to write another sci-fi piece, I'll read more sci-fi books, because then, you know, it will influence what I'm writing in a rather lovely way. Okay, so I beat writer's block. I had writer's block because I was writing this for a year, especially towards the end, which was dangerous because I probably should have known what I was doing at the end, but I didn't. So I was like, okay, I'm nearing the end, I need to figure out what I'm supposed to do, and I don't know it. So what did I do? I read some Lovecraft. The tale about Cthulhu in particular. This lovely guy helped me beat writer's block, because as soon as I started reading, I started writing again. And the flow just kind of turned back on, Sylvester got himself back into shape, and words started coming again. And that was lovely. And it goes back to the idea of read a lot, write a lot. So reading helped me get back into writing. Alright, so before editing, you must forget. Because, as I've said before, it's a lot easier to edit somebody else's work. It's easier to cut things and name it and, you know, make it better. So what I did, I was like, okay, here's some things that I want to do before I go back. So I finished writing my first draft, so I had a Google Doc, and I was like, okay, I'm going to let this sit for a certain number of days and forget as much as I can about it. I read On Writing by Stephen King, and he talks about how long he likes to let things sit, and it was like several months. I didn't have that kind of time, because if I waited several months, I would be doing my edits in May. So I was like, okay, I gotta do this now. So it took 3 days, I think, and I was like, okay, over these 3 days, I'm gonna forget as much as I can. So I read On Writing, I watched some YouTube videos about writing, I read another book, I created my editorium, which I don't know if it's a word, but I made it up, so it is. And it's just my desk that's kind of clear, it's that picture down there. And then I took a forgetting bath, because I had a bath bomb and I wanted to. And it was awesome, just saying. So, yes. So I forgot everything. And now, on to editing, which is actually more important than you might think. So I like to edit on paper, because staring at the screen for that long is exhausting. So I printed out a copy of it, and I went through and I did all of these edits. With a single pen, that I'll get to in a moment. But basically, I had a span of like 3 days where every single second I was editing. Like, my free period, I went back to my house and I edited. Mega block, I went back to my house right before sports. I even brought it to sports one time and edited it in the theater. So I wrote it down on paper, and then I put all the edits back onto my computer. And at that point, I had a pretty functional second draft. But what did I do? What did I edit? Here we go. So first, these are what my average edited papers look like. Just for curiosity's sake. Here's what Stephen King's average edited papers look like, which these are from On Writing. So you can see my King's curiosities. So for editing, there was a couple of things that I wanted to do specifically, because I read Stephen King's On Writing, and he talked about editing, and a couple of the things that he talked about, I was like, okay, I want to implement this. I want to do what he does because he is amazing. So the first thing that he talked about was to write is human, to edit is divine, and I agree, because good editing can make or break stories. And he talked about killing your darlings, omitting needless words, and then I recognized some of just the stupid things that I do while writing, such as seams, dialogue tags, and 2 identical sentences. And then this, the second draft equals the first draft minus 10%, which I will talk about in a moment. And then also my editing pen, which is that one, same picture. Alright, so first of all, killing your darlings. For me, this happens on the level of a sentence, of killing sentences that I love, but might be confusing to the reader or space things out when like the pace needs to be quickened. So for instance, this particular darling takes place on N1, the ice planet with the sea snakes. There were 2 main species on this planet. One was like the main species, which I talked about, and then the other one was the sea snakes. And I gave a lot of description for the sea snakes, even though they weren't the main focus of the story. And I was like, okay, I didn't describe the main species, and I don't want to because I want it to be a mystery. But I explained the sea snakes a lot. So I unfortunately had to cut the sea snakes description, which is this sentence. It is said that the sea snakes were stoked circular fish before they hid, but had been beaten by the water into thin whitefish and possibly long bodies. They fit better through the trenches this way. I love that idea, that water just like crushed fish down to these like long eel-like things and now they can like swim around. I love that. But I had to cut it, because it didn't work. However, for every time that I kill a darling, I save one, because I'm a selfish writer, and that's what we do. So for instance, this one is about space pirates. Basically, they were being chased, and this is their captain, the captain of all the space pirates, Captain Robin. So Captain Robin was aware that they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, but they would not give up. No, they would not. And the captain had a rigged sleeve. That might be confusing to people who might not know what a rigged sleeve is, and that would be fair because I made that up. Basically, it's just another way of saying that they had a trick up their sleeve or an ace in the hole, whatever. But I liked it too much to cut it, so I kept it. So, yeah, that's a save, darling. Omitting needless words. Stephen King once got this feedback when he was submitting things, and it was that your second draft equals your first draft minus 10%. Because editing is actually taking things out, not putting things in. So, that's what I wanted to do. I was like, okay, Stephen King does it, so I'm going to do it. So I did it. So my original draft was 177 pages. Now it is 147 pages, and those are the according word counts. That's actually more than 10%, but once I was editing, so I was cutting. And in the vein of omitting needless words, I never really actually went back into my story and cut out whole pages of it at a time. That didn't happen. Most of it was just me going back and just cutting out little words that really weren't needed. For instance, this sentence. He shivered as his feelings sharpened. Fine, but it's just, if you cut it, you just say he shivered, period. It's just more succinct, less extra words, and it just fit better with how I was writing in that particular time. So like for instance, this big thing, most of these are dialogue tags, so like all of these extra words, these extra words, these extra words, we're just clogging up a conversation that really should have been read kind of in one go, in kind of fast way of like, hey, he said this, she said that, they said this, he said this. And all those words were clogging it up. So I got rid of them. Same thing here, just little words. Instead of saying he had not moved an inch since he first sat up and had not spoken much at all, just he had not moved since he first sat up and had not spoken. Just less. And so like those are the little words that eventually cut out lead to such a big deficit between the two drafts. Oh, that was bad. Okay, editing pens. So I like to edit all with one pen. I don't really know why, but I wanted to, so I did it. But I use this pen, which Miss Tuck found on the floor over there. and then gave to me because she's a lovely human being. And I use this throughout the whole paper process. Some people like red pens. I think that those are fine, but for me, I like black. Unfortunately, this pen actually ran out of ink, so it's officially retired. I used all of the ink left in it. But back to editing. Omitting needless words. Stephen King hates ly adverbs, so I cut them. I just got rid of them. Especially with dialogue. I don't know if you've heard the whole thing of like, J.K. Rowling always says Dumbledore said calmly. I don't know if that's still a meme or whatever, but basically, always says that. And I don't really want to be like J.K. Rowling. I want to be like Stephen King, so I'm cutting them. So instead of Elise nodded solemnly, just Elise nodded. The captain drawled menacingly, just the captain drawled. Just less. Scene directions. I put in so many scene directions that this person went there, this person went there, when they weren't really needed. So instead of just like Ren walked up to them, instead of Ren walked up to them, purposely standing rather close, just Ren walked up to them. Simpler, less words. Oh my gosh, sometimes I would get mad at myself because I'd be looking at something and I'm like, why on earth would you write that and think that was a good sentence? That's how I know that I've spent enough time forgetting, is when I come back and get mad at myself for talking, for writing, because it's just bad. So like for this, I'm not even going to read this thing because there's just so much extra words that just really weren't needed in this specific place. It was just so much explanation that really just didn't need to be said. It was just so obvious. Okay. Showing versus telling. I love this. Because you always want to show instead of tell. So for instance, this is another Space Pirates one. Instead of saying, yet the captain had faith in her crew, I instead say, yet she continued giving orders. Says the same thing, just in a more interesting way. Stupid things I do. Okay. Then Elise spoke. Right after the sentence is Elise speaking. I don't even put that there because Elise is about to speak. Especially because this was in like a very like high like point in my story where it was like things were happening and it was like should be going pretty quickly. And I typed then Elise spoke. And then wrote, like, I got so mad at myself for that. So like, what on earth are you doing? Why would you write that sentence? And then also seemingly, I guess seemingly is one of my favorite words because I just put it everywhere. And I was like, and like seemingly, you use seemingly when it's like, the wall was seemingly made of brick, but then it wasn't. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, it looked like this, but it wasn't. I would just use it in places where it was like, the wood was seemingly brick, but it's like, it's actually wood. Like I would use it in the wrong place where I was describing things that were actually there, but made it sound like they weren't actually there. It was really weird. So just anytime I saw the word seem, I was just like, stop, get rid of it. Also more ly, prominently. Cut it. Stephen King says cut it, so I'm going to cut it. Alright. So before we get to the third draft, any questions? It's been a long time since I've asked the questions. Any questions? Alright. So third draft, feedback. Letting other people read your work. It is terrifying and also really awkward at the same time. Because then you start to think, oh my gosh, my friends really, really, really want to read my advanced study. This is terrifying. What if they hate it? What if they hate it? What if they really, really, really don't like it? What if it's really, really bad? I had a lot of those thoughts. Also, because I want feedback, it's really, really awkward to keep, like, I feel like I'm hounding people to be like, tell me what you think of my story. Which, as like an introvert who doesn't like to ask questions usually, it's pretty difficult to be like, please tell me what you think, tell me what you think of my story. Because also, it's like 150 pages. That's like a serious commitment to ask somebody to read 150 pages. Like, I wouldn't want to read 150 pages, especially online. Don't get me started. Anyway, so it's terrifying and really, really awkward, and because of that, I don't have a whole lot of feedback yet. But I do have a little bit, and the little bit that I've gotten so far is so important. Like, I already know that, like, there's so many things that, like, I need to fix in my story, And most of that stuff is stuff that I realized because lovely people have read my story and been like, hey, what the hell happened to this character? Or like, why on earth is the ending only like 20 pages? Like, so it's really important and it's so very helpful. So other silly things that I do and that I notice with feedback is that because the whole story is in my head, I sometimes forget which parts of it I put down and which parts of it I didn't. Which sounds kind of silly, but it's true. I wrote this part of my story where Elise has a girlfriend, and then later in the story, Elise shows up again, but her girlfriend doesn't. And I just totally forgot to like write Max back into the story, or just let people know like what happened to her, which is really stupid. And like you'd be like, why on earth would you forget that? But I did, so I have to go back and add that in. And then seeing it through other people's eyes is so helpful, because it's just like no matter how long I let something sit, it's always going to seem like my work at least a little bit. But like if you see it from somebody else's eyes, it is somebody else's work to them. So they're more willing to like cut stuff and just like get rid of the things that you don't want to, that you shouldn't have. So like darlings, so much easier to kill somebody else's darlings because it's somebody else's darlings. Killing your own darlings can be a little bit difficult. And because the entire work is my darling, it's really hard to like see when it's bad or see its shortcomings, like and fix it, because sometimes the fixing feels like maiming, even though it's really fixing. All right, and again, to write is human, to edit is divine. I love that quote, so I said it again. Because I really do think that just telling stories is part of being human. But then how you can edit those stories and package them and tell them in a very interesting and new way, or even just a very clear way, is a lot about editing. So, yes. Okay, so this is kind of where my journey ends with my advanced study. So this is as far into the process as I've got. As I said, I still kind of need some more feedback. But here's the plan so far going forward. I want to gather all the criticism and feedback that I possibly can, and I want to implement it. As I've said, I already know a couple of things that I need to do, like figure out what happened to Max and change the ending. And then after I do that, I want to read it over again for the very last time, and I want to read it out loud. Because when you read things out loud, you realize, like, oh, this sentence is unbelievably long, or this one's really short, or all these S's in the same sentence are really killing me here. And that can help just kind of with those sort of things. So I want to read it out loud for the very last time. Then I'm going to abandon it, because as Mr. Locke says, you're never going to be finished with something, you just get it ready to be abandoned. And so I will get my story ready to be abandoned. And as for the very last thing, Easter eggs. So because I spent so long writing this story, I put weird things into it because I could. Also, I'm really bad at naming things and coming up with names for things. So if I can steal somebody else's name for something, it's easier. So the first thing that I did was E Corporant. E Corporant is the name of a star that goes missing, and ends up being the catalyst for the whole story, because how the hell does the star go missing? And E Corcoran, or Edward Corcoran, is the name of a kid from It who goes missing because he was killed by It in the sewers. Here's a picture of It and Edward Corcoran. I love Stephen King, so of course I had to put even more of his stuff into it. Aster. Aster was the name of one of the spaceships that has wings that folds up around it like the flower petals. Aster means flower in some ancient Latin or Greek. Got that from Dr. Campbell in biology class. Het, De Weer, and Tessiers. Those are the names of the 3 moons that are the technological moons that travel around Augur. If you remix those letters, you get the Weird Sisters, because there's 3 of them, and Shakespeare. And also, again, I'm really bad at naming things. So I was like, I could just steal somebody else's name and pass it on as my own. The Astrios Theater is where Mr. Davier met Alex. Astrios, whatever it is, that is a Greek god of stars. Stars are relevant because my entire advanced study takes place in stars. So that's interesting. You can see, I guess that's a mask of him. I don't know, when I Googled his name, that came up, so I guess that's him. And then quotes. I filled my advanced study with quotes from fun people about space and stuff. The majority, the majority of the quotes are from the cool books that I read when I was still thinking I was going to put a lot of science into this. So I have a lot of those quotes. This is one of my favorite quotes. What is the only thing cooler than pirates? Space pirates. It's a true quote. Somebody actually said that. My dad said that. And I loved it, so I wrote it down and put it in my advanced study. So yeah. Any last questions? That's really it. Okay, Niblin. Are you going to publish it? I would love to. If I can, I still have a long way to go with the third draft, but I would love to publish it if I can find a way to do that. Yes. Yes. All right. Yes.
So you said there were 2 endings?
Yes.
So will you like try to incorporate both, or like which one would you use if you did publish?
That's a good question. Part of the feedback that I want to get back from people is I want to like ask them, hey, which one did you prefer? But I do like the idea of using both. I might steal that from you. I do like that. So I might use both. So yes. All right.
This is just more of a comment. I just love that you're talking about all the things that you like influenced you in your writing, especially your teachers. You named at least 3 English teachers and 2 science teachers, and that's pretty awesome. I love that.
Yes. Well, I do spend a lot of time in school, so it is a very big part of my life right now. So, you know, a lot of what I write, I'm speaking about that. So yeah, as well.
Yeah, you've been writing, you know, kind of all year. I mean, you've just been writing the poetry class, you've been an AP Lit, and you've been doing, you know, kind of writing fiction. How has writing in those different, you know, kind of genres informed each other, or have you compartmentalized?
That is an excellent question. Because that's also a question that I was thinking about when I picked the classes this year, or last year, for this year. Because I love writing for myself, and unfortunately you don't really get to do like a whole lot of that in classes. So I wanted to do my advanced study, obviously, but I wanted to take poetry because figurative language of poetry and the descriptions of poetry are so very powerful, and I was like, if I could do that in poetry, then hopefully I could be able to do that in stories and like fiction, and both can kind of bounce off of each other, and I can get better at writing prose by writing poetry. And then also learning about the great books, like why do we still read Shakespeare today, like why do we still read Frankenstein today, like those stories, like why do they keep coming back, like learning about that helps me write better stories. I don't think that anybody's going to be reading a story in 1,000 years, but maybe, who knows. I mean, Mary Shelley didn't know, so you never know. But yeah, so I love kind of just writing in general, so writing in every sense. Just practicing writing just really helps, you know, with the writing that I want to do personally. Because I really don't, sometimes I forgot that I was even doing an advanced study, because I write all the time. Like I write stories. I've been writing since I was really, really little. So yeah, I just write. And it was great to get a free period to do that writing. So that's great.
You mentioned with Carla, she was kind of born and her backstory just sort of flowed. Do you have other ideas of characters that you see in like future stories?
That is a very, do you mean like in future stories related to this one, or just in future stories like in general?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Very rarely do I ever think about characters that don't like have a story that goes with them. I do have this thing that I like to call like my mental oven. So like at any given time I have a couple of different pots simmering in the back that have different half-formed ideas of stories. And so sometimes if I think about a good idea or a good theme or a good image or something, I can kind of tuck it away back in there. So if I do ever have a character that's just kind of born, usually they go there on the back burner to kind of simmer around other stories. So I do have a couple, but I'm not going to say because they're secret characters for future stories. So yeah.
So you've been writing this story for a long time. How often have you gotten writer's blocks? Because like I feel like writing this story for over a month, there's been a lot of roadblocks, and how often have you gotten, and how have you kind of gone over that wall?
It's a very good question, because yes, I have been writing this for a very long time. And also, I'm writing this during a time where a lot of stuff was happening. So like at the very beginning of the school year, when we were like in person for the first time and everything was just like crazy, I didn't do a lot of writing during that time because I was so exhausted just trying to like go to school and go to sports and just like get life done that like doing anything writing related was just really, really difficult. So there's definitely been ups and downs. Like if I had a chart of like how many words I wrote each day, like every day, it would have a lot of ups and downs. Like there were weeks where I was writing like 1,000 words a day, and then like some weeks where like I really wasn't just doing much because I was, busy or had writer's block. But I would say specifically for writer's block, I had it pretty bad. There was like one time where I got it for like 3 weeks. That was pretty bad. I got it towards the end for a couple of days. But the main thing that I do, that I've realized helps with writer's block, is just reading other books. That's the main thing. When you get tired of writing, I just start reading, and then usually, influx of words, and reading leads to influx of word from writing. So just, reading and writing. Or honestly, just, if you really do need to step away, and just get bored. Because like that's how I found these ideas, just because I was doing something else. And kind of, not trying to like force words out because, they weren't. So you just have to do something else like knitting or sewing and then just kind of wait for the faucet to turn back on. So either waiting around or reading books, so you really have to balance schedule. But yeah. No.
How do you consider putting your favorite characters in this book in a sense game and letting them battle out through them?
That would be an interesting idea, but I don't think I could do that because honestly, I love all of my characters so much. Like even the ones that like turned out to be kind of the bad guys, like I still love them so much. And there's this there's this idea that like every character that you write is somehow at least a little bit of part of yourself. So that would be really weird to see like 8 different split-offs of my personality fighting each other virtually in video game. But that is an interesting idea. Never mind.
So you mentioned that you don't like having plot planned out beforehand. So with writing just off the top of your head, it feels like it'd be really easy to write yourself in a corner. Is that like something that you struggle with?
That is a very good question. So what I do, and I actually had a slide about this, but I cut it because I didn't think I'd have enough time. So it's great that I have time now. But basically what I like to do is I don't like to plan out the entire thing at once, other than just having like a vague idea of kind of what I want to happen that usually changes over time. But what I like to do is I kind of like, if you've ever seen that, just random like that cartoon of like, there's a train chugging along the track and it like puts down track and it goes and it puts down track and it goes and it puts down track. That's kind of what I do. I plan out like a little bit of like thinking about where the characters are right now, what I can see them doing for the next like, couple pages or so. Just so that I have like a vague idea of like a checklist of like, okay, seeing who Ren and Isaac are right now, who Timber is right now, what are they going to do when faced with these situations, where are they going to go? And that way it's kind of like, I don't ever plan too far ahead, and I can kind of just keep going with like whatever happens spontaneously. I can just kind of move in whatever the directions happens. But also, I like lists. I'm one of those people that likes lists. I like to write things down and check them off when I read them. So, yeah, do that. So yeah. But thankfully, I haven't really ever written myself into a hole. Because the best part about writing your way into a hole is that it's usually actually pretty easy to write your way out of it. Which is nice. Just kind of put an eraser in there and throw it off in the direction. Okay.
How do you know, like, when to stop? Because I know this has been, like, a long time, but, like, I always struggle with, like, when I'm writing something, like, I never know when to stop, or, like, just end it.
Do you mean, like, as a story as a whole, or, like, about a specific scene?
As a story as, like, a whole.
Story as a whole.
Like, when does it end?
That is a fantastic question, because, honestly, I could write about this story forever. Like, I could go into Ren's backstory and talk about that forever. I could talk about, like, Isaac's future or Tim Burton's future, just like forever and ever and ever and ever. So that's a very good question, and one that I honestly haven't figured out yet. Because as I'm going back to my third draft, I'm like, oh my gosh, I really should have written about this more. Or why did I write so much about that one planet? It's really not relevant to the story. So that's a very good question, and actually one that I'm still kind of trying to figure out going into the third draft, what I want to write more about. And then also the ending, like I have one ending that like ties everything up into a nice little bow, and the one that keeps going. So we'll see, I guess, is the answer to that question. But I mean, I just enjoy writing, so I mean, if I'm writing, I'm happy. So I mean, I guess it would probably just be other people getting mad at me if they want to read like hundreds and hundreds of pages.